Look around your room. What do you see? Maybe a ballpoint pen, some M&Ms, a roll of duct tape. You might have a microwave in your kitchen. These things feel normal, they feel like they've always been here, but they haven't. Many of the objects we use every single day have a hidden history. A history tied to a single global event. The Second World War was a period of immense destruction. It was also a period of incredible invention. When nations focus all their resources on a single goal, things get created fast. Problems that seemed impossible to solve suddenly had solutions. Materials that were once rare were needed in massive quantities. This pressure cooker of necessity changed the world. It didn't just create military hardware, it created the stuff of our daily lives. How did a failed attempt to make a gun sight become the glue that fixes your broken mug? Why was a bouncy, useless substance developed for wartime use now sitting in a child's toy box? The answers connect a global conflict from 80 years ago to the objects in your hands right now. The link between a radar system and your frozen dinner is more direct than you think. Let's look at the ordinary things around us and uncover their extraordinary origins. Number 25. Could a mother's letter really invent the world's most useful tape? Yes, it seems it could. The story of duct tape doesn't start in a high-tech lab with scientists in white coats. It starts with a woman named Vesta Stout. She was a mother of 2 sons in the Navy. She worked at the Green River Ordnance Plant in Illinois during the war. Her job was packing ammunition boxes. She was good at her job, but she saw a problem. A serious one. The ammo boxes were sealed with thin paper tape. A tab was used to tear it open. Then the box was dipped in wax to make it waterproof. The design was clever, but it had a flaw. The paper tape was weak. The tabs often tore off. Soldiers in the middle of a fight had to waste precious seconds struggling to open a box of ammunition. Vesta knew this could cost lives. She had a simple, brilliant idea. Why not use a strong, waterproof cloth tape to seal the boxes? It would be durable, and soldiers could rip it open easily with their bare hands, no tab needed. She told her bosses about it. They didn't listen. They dismissed her idea. Vesta Stout was persistent. She knew her idea was good. She believed it could save lives, maybe even her own sons' lives. So she did something bold. On February 10th, 1943, she sat down and wrote a letter. She didn't send it to a local newspaper or her congressman. She sent it directly to the President of the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt. In her letter, she explained the problem clearly. She drew diagrams. She laid out her solution for a cloth-based tape. She ended the letter with a plea, expressing her hope that he would see the value in her idea. The letter worked. Roosevelt saw the potential. He passed it to the War Production Board. They got in touch with a company that knew about adhesives, Johnson & Johnson. The company's Revlite division, which made medical adhesive tapes, was tasked with the project. A team led by men like Johnny DeNoye and Bill Gross developed Vesta's idea into a real product. They used a strong cotton fabric called cotton duct as the base. They coated it with a rubber-based adhesive. And they put a layer of waterproof polyethylene on top. The result was a strong, flexible, waterproof tape. It was easy to tear by hand. It was perfect. The military originally called it duct tape after the cotton duck fabric. The soldiers loved it. It was olive drab green. They used it for everything. They sealed ammo boxes. They repaired trucks, tents, and even aircraft. It was a universal fix-it tool. After the war, the soldiers came home. They brought their love for this incredible tape with them. The country was experiencing a housing boom. A new use for the tape emerged, sealing the joints in heating and air conditioning ducts. To match the silvery color of the ducts, the tape's color was changed from green to silver. The name shifted in popular use from duct tape to duct tape. It became a staple in every toolbox in America. Vesta Stout's idea, born from a mother's concern, was now in millions of homes. She received a letter from President Roosevelt and a Chicago Tribune War Workers Award for her contribution. You know, what do we still not know about this? How many other life-saving ideas from ordinary workers were ignored or lost during that period? If Vesta Stout hadn't written directly to the president, would duct tape even exist today? What was the exact chemical formula of that very first batch, and how has it changed over the decades? Number 24, how did a quest for a perfect gun sight lead to superglue? Sometimes, the most useful inventions are complete accidents. This is the story of superglue. It was discovered not once, but twice by the same person who initially thought it was a failure. The man was Dr. Harry Coover. He was a chemist working for Eastman Kodak. In 1942, the world was at war. The demand for new materials was huge. Dr. Coover and his team were trying to create a new kind of clear plastic. The military needed it for precision gun sights. They were experimenting with a class of chemicals called cyanoacrylates. During one experiment, Coover and his colleague Fred Joyner synthesized a new formulation. It had a strange property. It stuck to everything, and it stuck instantly. Anything the liquid touched bonded together almost permanently. The lab equipment was ruined. The chemists found their fingers stuck together. For their project, this was a disaster. They were trying to make a clear, stable plastic for lenses. This sticky mess was the exact opposite of what they wanted. It was a frustrating failure. They abandoned the cyanoacrylates and moved on to other chemical compounds. The sticky substance was forgotten, a footnote in a lab notebook. The war ended. Life moved on. 9 years later, in 1951, Dr. Coover was working on a different project. He was now the head of a research team at the Eastman Chemical Company in Tennessee. They were trying to develop a heat-resistant polymer for jet canopies. One of his team members, a researcher named Fred Joyner, decided to test the old cyanoacrylates again. He spread a thin layer of the compound between two expensive glass prisms in a refractometer to measure its properties. He got his measurement, but then he tried to take the prisms apart. They were stuck permanently. The two pieces of precision glass were now one. Joyner's expensive equipment was destroyed. But this time, a light bulb went on in Dr. Coover's head. He realized the incredible strength of the bond. He remembered the frustration from 9 years earlier. But now, he didn't see a failure. He saw a product. He saw a glue that needed no heat, no pressure, and no mixing. It just worked. All it needed was a trace amount of water vapor, which is present on almost every surface. The water acts as a catalyst, starting a process called polymerization. The liquid molecules link together into long, strong chains, forming a solid plastic mesh that locks the two surfaces together. It took another 7 years to perfect the formula and convince his company of its commercial potential. In 1958, it was finally released to the public under the name Eastman 910. It was later branded as Super Glue. It was first demonstrated on the popular TV show I've Got a Secret, where Coover lifted the host, Gary Moore, off the ground using a single drop of the glue, bonding two steel cylinders. The public was amazed. The glue found its way into homes and workshops. It also found a more serious application. During the Vietnam War, field medics used a cyanoacrylate spray to seal wounds on the battlefield, stopping bleeding until a soldier could get to a hospital. This medical application, explored in studies published in journals like the American Journal of Surgery, saved countless lives. Today, medical-grade versions of superglue are used in operating rooms around the world. The accidental discovery, a nuisance in a wartime lab, became a household name and a life-saving tool. What are the long-term health effects of frequent exposure to cyanoacrylate fumes for hobbyists and factory workers? What other failed experiments are sitting in old lab notebooks just waiting to be rediscovered? Could a similar instant bonding agent be developed from organic, non-toxic materials? Number 23. Can a bouncy mistake become a world-famous toy? The journey from a government lab to a child's toy chest is a strange one. That's the path Silly Putty took. Its story begins with a shortage. During World War II, Japan had cut off the United States' access to natural rubber from Southeast Asia. Rubber was critical. It was needed for tires, for trucks and planes, for boots, for gas masks. The country was desperate for a substitute. The U.S. government put out a call to scientists and companies across the country. Find a way to make synthetic rubber. Make it cheap. Make it fast. Thousands of researchers went to work. One of them was a man named James Wright, an engineer at a General Electric lab in New Haven, Connecticut. In 1943, he was experimenting. He was trying to create a new silicone-based compound that could replace rubber. He mixed boric acid with silicone oil. The result was not what he expected. It wasn't a stable, useful rubber. Instead, he got a gooey, sticky, bouncy substance. It was a curiosity. It could stretch farther than rubber. It could bounce higher. It could lift images from newspaper comics. If you hit it with a hammer, it would shatter. If you left it alone, it would slowly spread into a puddle. From a scientific and industrial perspective, it was a total failure. It had no practical use for the war effort. It couldn't be formed into tires or boots. It was a solution to a problem that didn't exist. The scientists at General Electric and the War Production Board looked at it, shrugged, and moved on. The bouncy putty was sent around to other labs, but no one could find a use for it. It was a novelty, an oddity, and nothing more. For years, the substance remained a laboratory curiosity. People would play with it at parties, marveling at its strange properties. And then a man named Peter Hodgson entered the picture. He was an unemployed advertising copywriter. In 1949, he saw the putty at a party and saw its potential. Not as an industrial material, but as a toy. He borrowed $147 and bought the production rights from General Electric. He packed 1-ounce blobs of the putty into plastic eggs and decided to call it Silly Putty. He took it to the International Toy Fair in New York in 1950. At first, no one was interested. Store owners didn't know what to make of it. Then a writer for the New Yorker magazine discovered it and wrote a small piece about it. The orders started pouring in. Within 3 days, Hodgson sold over 250,000 eggs of Silly Putty. It became one of the most popular toys of the 20th century. Kids loved it for its bizarre properties. The fact that it could lift comic strip images, a result of the specific petroleum-based inks used at the time, was a huge selling point. The toy's success was documented in business publications like Fortune magazine, which hailed it as a marketing marvel. The accidental substance, a byproduct of a wartime search for rubber, had found its true calling in a plastic egg. So what questions remain? How many other potential toys or consumer products were invented as failures in government labs and simply thrown away? Does the original chemical formula created by James Wright in 1943 differ significantly from the Silly Putty sold today? What cognitive benefits, if any, does playing with a non-Newtonian fluid like Silly Putty have on a child's developing brain? Number 22, what if the key to winning a war was chocolate that didn't melt? War is not just about weapons. It's about logistics. It's about keeping soldiers supplied and morale high. Sometimes a simple piece of candy can make a big difference. This is where M&Ms come in. Their story is directly linked to the needs of soldiers in the field. Forrest Mars, Sr., the son of the founder of the Mars Candy Company, had a falling out with his father. He moved to England in the 1930s. There, he saw soldiers eating small chocolate buttons. These weren't just any chocolates. They were coated in a hard sugar shell. This shell prevented the chocolate from melting in their hands or in their pockets. It was a simple yet brilliant solution to a common problem. Mars knew this was a huge opportunity. He returned to the United States and partnered with Bruce Murray, the son of the president of the Hershey Chocolate Company. This partnership was crucial. Hershey controlled the rationing of chocolate at the time, so Mars needed their help to get the supplies he needed. They combined the first letters of their last names, Mars and Murray, and created the name M&M's. In 1941, M&M's plain chocolate candies were introduced. Their timing was perfect. The United States entered the war, and the military was looking for a high-energy, durable snack for its soldiers. Chocolate was a great source of calories and a morale booster, but regular chocolate bars were a mess in warm climates or in a soldier's pocket. M&M's, with their patented hard candy shell, were the perfect solution. The company secured a contract to supply M&M's exclusively to the U.S. military. The candies were packaged in cardboard tubes and became a part of a soldier's C rations. The famous slogan, "Melts in your mouth, not in your hand," wasn't just marketing fluff. It was a literal description of the product's primary function, a function born out of military necessity. Soldiers across the world, from the Pacific Islands to the fields of Europe, had M&Ms when these millions of soldiers returned home After the war, they were already familiar with the candy. They had a taste for it. This created a massive, ready-made market. Mars bought out Murray's share in the company and began marketing M&Ms to the general public in 1947. The candy was an instant success. The cardboard tube was replaced by the brown pouch we know today. The candy's journey is a case study in how military needs can create and popularize a consumer product. The research that went into creating the perfect stable candy shell had a military purpose. The distribution network that spread the candy across the globe was the U.S. Armed Forces. The first massive advertising campaign was, in effect, the millions of GIs who came home with a story to tell and a favorite candy. What was the exact formula of that first sugar shell? And how did they prevent cracking during production and shipping? Are there internal military reports detailing the specific morale-boosting effects of candy rations on soldiers? How did the wartime partnership between two fierce competitors, Mars and Hershey, actually function behind the scenes? Number 21, could a simple metal spring capture the physics of a nation? Sometimes an invention needs the right moment to be born. The Slinky is one of those. It was an accident, but an accident that happened inside a wartime shipyard. Richard James was a naval mechanical engineer working at the Cramp Shipbuilding Company in Philadelphia in 1943. He was developing a new kind of meter. This meter was designed to monitor horsepower on naval battleships. The design involved using sensitive springs to stabilize the equipment on rough seas. One day, James was working at his desk. He accidentally knocked a box of these experimental springs off a shelf. He watched as one of the springs, instead of just clattering to the floor, seemed to walk. It gracefully stepped end over end from the shelf to a stack of books, then to the tabletop, and finally to the floor where it coiled up neatly. So he was captivated. He saw something more than just a spring. He saw a toy. He took the spring home to his wife, Betty. He showed her what it could do. She was the one who saw its potential immediately. She searched through a dictionary for a name that would fit the toy's graceful, flowing motion. She found the word slinky, a Swedish word meaning sleek or sinuous. The name was perfect. Richard James spent the next 2 years experimenting. He tried different types of steel wire and different tensions. He needed to find the perfect balance of weight, flexibility, and dimensions to make the toy walk downstairs consistently. He developed a machine to coil 80 feet of wire into the 2-inch tall spring. He and Betty borrowed $500 to start a company, James Industries. Their big break came in November 1945, just after the war ended. The Gimbel's department store in Philadelphia agreed to let them demonstrate the toy. They were given a small space and an end table. At first, no one bought one. The pile of 400 Slinkies just sat there. People were hesitant. Richard James got discouraged. But then he decided to do a live demonstration on a small ramp. A crowd gathered. They watched in amazement as the simple metal spring walked down the ramp on its own. It was like magic. In just 90 minutes, they sold all 400 Slinkies. The toy was a phenomenon. By Christmas, they had sold over 20,000. The Slinky became a classic American toy. Its physics are surprisingly complex, involving gravity, momentum, and harmonic motion, as detailed in many physics textbooks. But to a child, it's just pure, simple fun. The Slinky's origin is tied to the war effort. It was born in a shipyard, created by an engineer working on naval technology. The high-quality Swedish steel wire he used was available because of its industrial applications. The technology to precisely coil springs was refined for military use. Without that specific time and place, the accidental discovery might never have happened. So, what are the unknowns? What was the specific naval meter Richard James was working on? And was it ever successfully deployed? How many other potential toys were inadvertently created in industrial settings, but were never recognized by their inventors? Has anyone done a serious study on the psychological appeal of the Slinky's predictable, repetitive motion? Number 20, can change the way the world moves? It sounds like an exaggeration. How can a simple container be so important? But the jerry can was not just a container. It was a masterpiece of design, and it gave a significant logistical advantage to those who used it. Its story begins before the war in Germany. In the 1930s, the German military wanted a better way to transport fuel. The fuel cans they were using were flimsy and inefficient. They were rectangular, made of thin metal, and required a separate funnel and wrench to open and use. They leaked. They were hard to carry. They couldn't be stacked easily. They were a logistical nightmare. They held a design competition. A company called Muller Co. came up with a revolutionary design in 1937. The new can, called the Wehrmacht Einheitskanister, was brilliant in its simplicity. It was made of pressed steel. It had 3 handles. This was key. One person could carry 2 cans in one hand, or 2 people could carry a full can between them. The handles also allowed for an easy passing line to load and unload trucks. The can had a large spout with a quick locking cam lever, or no wrench was needed. It had an air pipe that ran from the spout to an air pocket at the back of the can. This meant fuel could be poured smoothly, without the glug-glug splashing of other cans. The spout had a gasket to create a perfect seal. It wouldn't leak even if it was upside down. The sides of the can were stamped with an X shape. This wasn't for decoration. It added strength and allowed the can to expand or contract with changes in temperature and altitude without bursting. It held exactly 20 liters, or about 5 gallons, a manageable weight for one person. Its shape was a flattened rectangle, which made it easy to stack securely. It was so well designed that if it was filled with fuel, it had just enough air inside to float if it fell into water. During the early stages of the war, Allied forces started encountering these strange cans. American and British engineers were impressed. They had never seen anything like it. Their own fuel cans were terrible. The British used a flimsy 4-gallon can made of tin plate that leaked easily. The Americans used a 10-gallon can that was based on an old water can design. It was heavy, required a wrench and funnel, and was prone to bursting. An American engineer named Paul Pleiss was in Germany before the war and saw the German cans. He realized their superiority. He and a German colleague built a vehicle and planned to drive it to India. They took 3 of the German cans with them for water. When the war started, Pleiss drove his vehicle to Calcutta, shipped it to the US, and tried to convince the American military to copy the German can. At first, military officials were resistant. They tried to modify their own designs, but the modifications failed. Finally, they decided to make a direct copy of the German can. They called it the jerry can, a slang term for Germans. By 1943, millions of jerrycans were being produced in the US and Britain. As documented in books like The Tools of War by an R.G. Grant, the jerrycan was a vital piece of equipment. It allowed armies to move fuel and water to the front lines quickly and efficiently. It fueled the rapid advances of mechanized armies. After the war, the design was so perfect that it was adopted by armies and civilians all over the world. The tough, reliable, easy-to-use can is still the standard for portable fuel and water storage today. You can find them in garages, on boats, and on the back of off-road vehicles. A simple can, perfected under the pressures of war, became a global standard. What do we not know? Who was the specific unnamed engineer at Muller Co. who came up with the 3-handle design? Are there any surviving original blueprints from the 1937 design competition? How many millions of gallons of fuel were lost by Allied forces due to their inferior can designs before the jerry can was adopted? Number 19, could seeing in the dark with radio waves change how we cook? The connection between a military radar system and the microwave oven in your kitchen is direct and a little bit strange. It involves a self-taught engineer, a powerful piece of military technology, and a melted chocolate bar. During the war, one of the most important technological races was in radar. Radar stands for radio detection and ranging. It works by sending out radio waves. These waves travel through the air, hit an object like an airplane, and bounce back. A receiver picks up the bounce waves. By measuring the time it takes for the waves to return, you can tell how far away the object is. It was a revolutionary way to see things in the dark or through clouds. The heart of a powerful radar system was a device called a cavity magnetron. This was a British invention from 1940, developed by John Randall and Harry Boot at the University of Birmingham. The magnetron was a small, efficient tube that could generate high-powered microwaves, a type of radio wave. This technology was so important that it was shared with the United States in a secret mission. American companies like Raytheon were tasked with mass producing them. One of the key engineers at Raytheon was a man named Percy Spencer. He was a genius. He had only finished grammar school, but he taught himself engineering and became one of the world's leading experts on radar tube design. He received over 300 patents in his lifetime. In 1945, Spencer was working in his lab. He was testing a new active magnetron. He was standing in front of it. He reached into his pocket for a snack he had, a peanut cluster bar. He discovered it had melted into a gooey mess. He was intrigued. He wasn't the first person to notice that microwaves produced heat, but he was the first person to wonder what he could do with it. He was a curious man. He sent a boy out to get a bag of popcorn kernels. He placed the bag in front of the magnetron. The kernels started to pop and fly all over the lab. The next day, he brought an egg to work. He placed it near the magnetron tube. The egg began to shake and tremble. A skeptical colleague looked closer, and the egg exploded in his face. Percy Spencer had confirmed his hypothesis the low-density microwave energy could cook food quickly. He realized the commercial potential. Raytheon filed a patent for a microwave cooking process on October 8, 1945. The first commercial microwave oven was built in 1947. It was called the Ratarange. It was nothing like the ones we have today. It was huge. It stood almost 6 feet tall and weighed over 750 pounds. It was water-cooled and cost about $5,000, which is over $60,000 in today's money. They were sold mainly to restaurants and hospitals. It took decades for the technology to shrink in size and price. By the late 1960s, smaller, more affordable countertop models became available. The microwave oven, a direct descendant of a top-secret wartime radar component, began to change kitchens all over the world. A discovery made because of a melted candy bar in a military lab now reheats our leftovers. What questions are left? What were the long-term health effects on the early radar technicians who were regularly exposed to high levels of microwave radiation? Were there other accidental discoveries made in radar labs that were simply dismissed and never pursued? How different would our modern food culture be if the microwave oven had never been invented? Number 18, how did a war on disease scale up a miracle drug? The story of penicillin is often told as a moment of pure chance. The Scottish scientist Alexander Fleming, in 1928, notices a spot of mold on a petri dish that is killing the bacteria around it. It's a great story, but it's only the beginning. The discovery was one thing. Turning that mold into a medicine that could save millions of lives was a completely different challenge. And that challenge was met because of the immense pressure of World War II. For more than a decade after Fleming's discovery, penicillin remained a laboratory curiosity. It was incredibly difficult to produce. Fleming himself couldn't figure out how to isolate and purify the active ingredient from the penicillium mold. The tiny amounts he could produce were unstable and not very potent. The idea of making enough to treat even one person seemed impossible. The breakthrough came from a team of scientists at Oxford University led by Howard Florey and Ernst Chain. In 1940, with war raging in Europe, they began to reinvestigate penicillin. They were funded by a small grant from the Rockefeller Foundation. They managed to purify a small amount of the drug. They tested it on mice infected with deadly bacteria. The untreated mice died. The mice treated with penicillin survived. It was a miracle. In 1941, they treated their first human patient, a police officer named Albert Alexander. He was dying from a severe infection. They gave him penicillin, and he started to make a remarkable recovery. But their supply ran out. After 5 days, they couldn't make it fast enough. The infection returned, and he died. It was a tragic lesson. They needed to find a way to make penicillin on a massive scale. With Britain under constant threat, they couldn't build the large factories needed. So in the summer of 1941, Florey and his colleague Norman Heatley traveled to the United States. They went to a government research lab in Peoria, Illinois. They carried a secret weapon with them, a small sample of the penicillium mold smeared on the inside of their coat pockets to keep it safe. The American government, seeing the potential of this drug for the war effort, launched a massive coordinated program. And they brought together government labs, universities, and major pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer, Merck, and Squibb. It was a race against time. They needed to solve two problems: find a better, more productive strain of the mold and develop a way to grow it in huge quantities. The search for a better mold strain was a worldwide effort. Scientists asked pilots to collect soil samples from all over the world. The best strain, however, was found on a cantaloupe in a Peoria market. This new strain, Penicillium chrysogenum, produced 200 times more penicillin than Fleming's original. Scientists then used X-rays and ultraviolet light to mutate it, creating even more potent versions. The second problem, mass production, was solved using deep fermentation tanks. Pfizer, a company that had experience fermenting citric acid in large vats for soft drinks, adapted their technology. Instead of growing the mold on shallow trays, they could now grow it in huge 10,000-gallon tanks. By 1943, they were producing enough penicillin to treat the Allied forces. The drug was a game changer. It dramatically reduced deaths from infected wounds and diseases like pneumonia. Historians like John C. Hemeter have written extensively on its impact. Before penicillin, a simple scratch could lead to a deadly infection. After penicillin, soldiers had a much better chance of survival. After the war, the drug became available to the public, launching the age of antibiotics and revolutionizing medicine. The war didn't invent penicillin, but it took a laboratory curiosity and turned it into the miracle drug that saved a generation. What do we still need to know? How many other promising antibiotic molds were discovered during that frantic search, but were discarded because they weren't as potent as the cantaloupe strain? What were the exact details of the commercial agreements between the British scientists and the American pharmaceutical companies? Are there undiscovered, naturally occurring antibiotics in the world today that could be found using a similar global search effort? Number 17. Could the need to send secret messages shrink a library onto a desk? Imagine trying to send 1 million letters across an ocean during a war. The ships and planes needed to carry them are also needed for troops and supplies. The letters are bulky, they're heavy, and they are vulnerable to being lost or intercepted. This was the problem faced by the military and families during World War II. The solution came from the world of banking and libraries microfilm. The technology itself wasn't new. Microphotography, the process of creating tiny photographs of documents, was invented in the 19th century. Banks were already using it to create backup copies of checks, but the war created a new, urgent need for it on an unprecedented scale. The British called their system airgraph. The Americans called it Victory Mail, or V-Mail. The system was ingenious. A person would write a letter on a special form. The form was standardized, about the size of a modern piece of paper. The letters were then censored for security. After that, they were photographed and converted into thumbnail-sized images on rolls of 16mm film. A single roll of film could hold over 1,500 letters. These small, light rolls of film were then flown overseas. Instead of a mailbag weighing 2,500 pounds, you could send the same number of letters in a pouch weighing just 45 pounds. This saved a huge amount of cargo space on planes and ships, space that was desperately needed for war materials. The journey was also faster and safer. Once the film arrived at its destination, the process was reversed. The tiny images were projected onto photographic paper and developed into small letters, about 1/4 the original size. These were then folded, put in an envelope, and delivered to the soldier. The system was a collaboration between the government and private companies like Eastman Kodak, which provided the film and the specialized equipment. Between 1942 and 1945, over 1 billion pieces of V-mail were sent. It was a vital link between soldiers and their families back home. It boosted morale. It made the vast distances feel a little smaller. The system's efficiency was studied and documented by the U.S. Postal Service and the military. It was a logistical triumph, but the impact of this massive project went beyond wartime mail. It popularized and refined the technology of microfilm. After the war, libraries, universities, and archives adopted microfilm as a way to preserve and store vast amounts of information in a small space. Old newspapers, rare books, and historical documents could be saved from decay. Researchers could access information that was once locked away in distant archives. The V-Mail project was a large-scale demonstration of the power of information compression. It laid the conceptual groundwork for how we think about data today. The idea of taking a large physical object, converting it into a compact format for transmission, and then reconstructing it at the other end is the basis of how digital communication works. Your email and text messages are, in a way, like the digital descendants of a V-mail letter. Like, what are the remaining questions? How many V-mail letters were lost or destroyed, and are there any undiscovered caches of undeveloped film rolls sitting in government archives? What was the psychological impact on soldiers of receiving these miniaturized, impersonal-looking letters compared to traditional handwritten mail? Did the widespread use of V-mail change the way people wrote letters, knowing they would be read by censors and photographed? Number 16, can a wooden mosquito fly faster than a fighter jet? In a time of metal, one of the most successful aircraft was made of wood. It was called the de Havilland Mosquito. You know, it was a British plane, and it was a marvel of engineering and unconventional thinking. Its story is about using an overlooked material to create something extraordinary. As war approached, the British Air Ministry was focused on building heavy metal bombers with lots of guns. But Geoffrey de Havilland, a famous aircraft designer, had a different idea. He proposed a small, lightweight bomber. It would be so fast that it wouldn't need any defensive guns. It could simply outrun enemy fighter planes. The key to its speed was its construction. It would be made almost entirely of wood. The Air Ministry was skeptical. Wood seemed like a step backward. The age of modern aviation was supposed to be about metal, but de Havilland persisted. He argued that wood had several advantages. It was a non-strategic material. The country's metal supplies, especially aluminum, were needed for other fighters and bombers. But Britain had a surplus of wood. It also had a large workforce of skilled woodworkers, like cabinet makers, furniture builders, and piano makers, who were out of work because of the war. They could be put to work building his plane. The design was revolutionary. The body of the mosquito, called the fuselage, was made from a wooden sandwich. It consisted of a layer of balsa wood between two layers of plywood. These layers were glued and screwed together. This composite material was light, strong, and easy to shape into a smooth, aerodynamic form. The wings were also made of wood. The first mosquito flew in November 1940. Its performance was stunning. It was faster than almost any other plane in the sky, including the famous Spitfire fighter. The military was finally convinced. They ordered it into mass production. The mosquito was incredibly versatile. It was used as a fast bomber, a fighter, a reconnaissance plane, and a night fighter. Its wooden construction had an unexpected benefit. It was one of the first stealth aircraft. It wood reflected radar waves poorly, making the mosquito difficult to detect by enemy ground radar. The plane's production was also unique. Because it was made of wood, parts of it could be built in small workshops and furniture factories all over the country and in Canada. This decentralized production made it less vulnerable to enemy bombing. The story of the mosquito's development is detailed in books like Mosquito, the Original Multi-Role Combat Aircraft by Graham M. Simons. The mosquito's success had a lasting impact on aviation and materials science. It proved the value of composite materials. The idea of bonding different materials together to create something with superior properties is a fundamental concept in modern engineering. Today, aircraft, cars, and even spacecraft are built with advanced composite materials like carbon fiber. These modern materials are the direct descendants of the mosquito's simple but brilliant plywood and balsa wood sandwich. It showed that sometimes the most advanced solution can come from a simple, overlooked material. What do we not know for sure? What was the exact formula of the glue used to bond the wooden layers, and was it a key secret to the plane's structural integrity? How many small, unrecorded workshops contributed to mosquito production, and have their stories been lost to history? What other advanced designs using non-traditional materials were proposed during the war, but were rejected by military officials? Number 15, how did a children's drink mix become an astronaut's breakfast? The story of Tang is a little different from the others. It wasn't invented for the war, but the science behind it was. And its path to fame came from another government-led high-stakes endeavor, the space race. But the foundation of Tang and many other processed foods lies in the massive food science research effort of World War II. During the war, feeding millions of soldiers across the globe was a massive logistical challenge. Food needed to be lightweight, have a long shelf life, be nutritious, and be easy to prepare in difficult conditions. This led to a huge investment in food science and technology. Scientists worked on dehydration, freeze drying, and creating synthetic vitamins and minerals. The goal was to pack as much nutrition into as little space and weight as possible. This effort produced things like K rations and C rations. They contained processed cheese, powdered coffee, and vitamin-fortified chocolate. The science of creating stable, powdered drink mixes with added vitamins was perfected during this time. The research was conducted in places like the Quartermaster Food and Container Institute in Chicago. After the war, the scientists and the technology from these programs moved into the private sector. Companies like General Foods wanted to use this new knowledge to create convenient products for the growing suburban American family. In 1957, a food scientist at General Foods named William A. Mitchell developed a new powdered drink mix. It was a blend of sugar, flavorings, and several vitamins and nutrients, including vitamins C and A. They called it Tang. General Foods launched Tang in 1959. At first, sales were poor. It was a product without a clear purpose. It was a breakfast drink, but people already had orange juice. Then NASA came along. The space agency was preparing for its manned missions into orbit. Just like the military, they needed food and drinks that were lightweight, compact, and nutritious. NASA tested Tang and found it was a good fit for the space program. The powder was easy to store. It mixed easily with the water astronauts had on board, and it helped mask the slightly metallic taste of the water from the spacecraft's life support system. In 1962, astronaut John Glenn drank Tang on his historic orbital flight aboard Friendship 7. NASA's use of Tang was a marketing dream for General Foods. They began advertising Tang as the drink of astronauts. Commercials showed astronauts floating in space drinking Tang. Sales skyrocketed. Every kid who dreamed of being an astronaut wanted to drink what the astronauts drank. Tang became a symbol of the space age in the future. The product itself was a direct result of the food science knowledge gained during the war. The ability to create a stable powder, infuse it with synthetic vitamins, and ensure it had a long shelf life was technology pioneered for military rations. The war created the science, the space race made it famous. What are the specific links? We don't know. Which specific wartime dehydration or vitamin stabilization techniques were directly adapted by William Mitchell for the original Tang formula? Are there internal NASA reports that detail the astronauts' real, uncensored opinions about the taste of Tang? How did the massive public health campaign to fortify foods with vitamins, which was accelerated by the war, influence the development of products like Tang? Number 14, what if the path to the jet age started on opposite sides of a conflict? The jet engine changed the world. It shrank the globe, connecting continents in a matter of hours. It is the reason we have modern air travel. And this revolutionary technology was developed almost simultaneously in secret by two different engineers in two different countries, both pushed forward by the urgency of war. The two men were Frank Whittle in Britain and Hans von Ohain in Germany. They worked independently. They did not know about each other's work. But they were both trying to solve the same problem. Propeller planes were reaching their limits. As they went faster, the tips of the propellers started to approach the speed of sound, which made them incredibly inefficient. A new way to power an airplane was needed. Frank Whittle was a brilliant Royal Air Force officer. He came up with the idea for a turbojet engine in 1929 and patented it in 1930. His concept was simple in theory. Air is sucked in at the front. A compressor squeezes the air, making it hot and dense. Fuel is sprayed into the compressed air and ignited. The hot, expanding gases shoot out the back, creating a powerful thrust that pushes the engine forward. It's like a controlled, continuous explosion. But no one in the British government or aviation industry was interested. They thought his ideas were impractical. For years, Whittle struggled to get funding. He formed his own small company, Powerjets Lid, in 1936. He finally built a working prototype engine that he tested in a factory in April 1937. At the same time, in Germany, Hans von Ohain, a young physicist, had a similar idea. He was financed by the aircraft manufacturer Ernst Heinkel. Von Ohain's team worked in secret. They developed their own jet engine. In August 1939, just days before the war began, a Heinkel He 178 aircraft powered by Von O'Hane's engine made the world's first successful flight of a purely jet-powered aircraft. The war accelerated everything. The British government, now realizing the military potential, poured resources into Whittle's project. In May 1941, the Gloucester E-2839, powered by Whittle's engine, made its first flight. The jet age had officially begun in Britain. Both sides now had the technology. The race was on to develop operational jet fighter planes. The development of the jet engine was one of the most significant technological leaps of the 20th century. It required huge advances in metallurgy to create alloys that could withstand the incredible heat and stress inside the engine. It required new understandings of aerodynamics and combustion. The story is well documented in books like Jet the Story of a Pioneer by Frank Whittle himself. After the war, jet engine technology spread rapidly. The first commercial jet airliner, the de Havilland Comet, entered service in 1952. The Boeing 707 followed in 1958. Air travel was transformed from a luxury for the rich into a means of mass transportation. This globalized world we live in, where you can have breakfast in New York and dinner in London, was made possible by the parallel wartime development of the jet engine. What are the big unknowns? How close did other engineers in other countries come to developing their own jet engines independently? Are there any truth to the rumors that spies exchanged early jet engine schematics, influencing the designs on either side? What specific metallurgical breakthroughs were the key to creating the first reliable turbine blades, and have those original alloy formulas been lost? Number 13. Can a war machine become a symbol of freedom and adventure? There are very few vehicles that are instantly recognizable all over the world. The Jeep is one of them. It's more than just a car, it's an icon, and it was born out of a simple, urgent military request. In 1940, the U.S. Army knew it needed a new type of vehicle. It needed a small, lightweight, four-wheel drive reconnaissance car. It had to be tough, reliable, and able to go anywhere. The Army sent out a list of specifications to 135 different automakers. The requirements were demanding. It had to have a wheelbase of no more than 75 inches, a height of no more than 36 inches, and weigh no more than 1,300 pounds. And the companies had only 49 days to produce a working prototype. It seemed like an impossible task. Only two companies responded seriously: the American Bantam Car Company and Willys Overland. Bantam, a small, struggling automaker, was the first to deliver a prototype. They hired a freelance designer named Carl Probst, who drew up the initial plans in just 2 days. Their prototype, known as the Bantam Reconnaissance Car, was delivered on time and met most of the Army's requirements. The Army was impressed, but Bantam was too small to produce the number of vehicles the military needed. So the Army gave Bantam's blueprints to Willys Overland and Ford and encouraged them to build their own prototypes based on the design. This was controversial, but the urgency of the situation overruled patent concerns. Willys Overland came back with a prototype called the Quad. Ford produced the Pygmy. Both were very similar to the Bantam design. The most significant contribution from Willys was its powerful Go Devil engine. The Army tested all three models and ultimately created a standardized design that took the best features of each. The Willys engine became the standard. Because Willys Overland couldn't meet the massive demand alone, Ford was also given a contract to produce the vehicle. The final version was officially designated the truck, 1/4-ton 4x4, but everyone called it the Jeep. The origin of the name is debated. Some say it came from the slurring of the initials DHP, Ford General Purpose. Others say it was named after a popular character from the Popeye cartoons named Eugene the Jeep. During the war, over 640,000 Jeeps were built. They served in every theater of the conflict. They were used as scout cars, ambulances, command vehicles, and more. Soldiers loved them for their ruggedness and versatility. The famous war correspondent Ernie Pyle wrote that the Jeep was one of the most important pieces of equipment for the American soldier. After the war, Willys Overland trademarked the Jeep name and began producing a civilian version, the CJ2A civilian Jeep. They marketed it to farmers and ranchers as a replacement for a tractor, but it soon caught on with the general public. It became a symbol of adventure, rugged individualism, and off-road freedom. The simple, utilitarian vehicle designed for the battlefield had found a new life on the open road. Its DNA can still be seen in every Jeep vehicle on the road today. What are the unresolved questions? What happened to the original Bantam prototype? And, does it still exist somewhere? How much financial compensation, if any, did the Bantam company ever receive for its foundational design work? Are there any definitive historical documents that finally prove the true origin of the name Jeep? Number 12, how did a failed rubber substitute end up in your kitchen cabinets? The story of Tupperware starts with the same problem as silly Putty, the search for a rubber substitute. But it also involves a special kind of plastic and a man who understood the power of a good seal. The man was Earl Tupper. He was an inventor and a chemical engineer. He worked for the DuPont Chemical Company in the 1930s. He was a tinkerer, always experimenting with materials. In 1938, he left DuPont to start his own company. He was fascinated with polyethylene, a plastic that was a byproduct of the oil refining process. At the time, it was a black, hard, smelly slag. Most people thought it was useless waste, but Tupper saw potential. He managed to get some of this waste material from his old employer. He developed a method to purify it, turning the black slag into a translucent, flexible, and durable plastic. It was lightweight, non-porous, and didn't break when dropped. During the war, his plastics company made parts for gas masks and Navy signal lamps. This work gave him valuable experience in molding and manufacturing plastic on a large scale. After the war, he wanted to use his new refined polyethylene to create consumer products. He made plastic cups, plates, and bowls. He called them Tupperware. His first products, released in 1946, were sold in department stores. But they didn't sell well. People didn't understand this new plastic material. They were used to glass and ceramic. The most innovative feature of his bowls was the lid. Tupper was inspired by the design of a paint can lid. He created an airtight, watertight seal. You could burp the container by lifting part of the lid to let the air out. This kept food fresher for longer, but the sealing mechanism wasn't intuitive. Customers in stores couldn't figure out how to work it. Sales were dismal. The product was a flop, but then Tupper noticed something strange. A few independent salespeople were selling a lot of his products. One of them was a woman named Brownie Wise. Wise was a single mother from Florida. She was selling Tupperware at home parties. At these parties, she could demonstrate the product. She could show people how to burp the seal. She could explain the benefits of the new plastic. She was creating a social event around the product. And it was working. Her sales were huge. Earl Tupper was a brilliant inventor, but he wasn't a great marketer. He saw the success of Brownie Wise's party plan. In 1951, he made a radical decision. He pulled all of his Tupperware products from retail stores. He decided to sell them exclusively through the home party network with Brownie Wise as the head of sales. The Tupperware party was born. It was a revolutionary sales model as documented in business histories like Tupperware Unsealed by Bob Keeling. It empowered a generation of women, giving them a way to earn their own income in a time when career options were limited. The innovative plastic, developed from industrial waste and refined through wartime production, became a household name not because of its technology, but because of a new way of selling. What are the big mysteries? What was the exact chemical process Earl Tupper developed to purify the polyethylene slag, and did he keep it a trade secret? How did the wartime experience of women working in factories influence the success of the Tupperware party model in the post-war era? Are there any recordings of Brownie Wise's early pioneering sales parties? Number 11, how did keeping pilots conscious lead to the modern airliner? Flying in a modern airplane is usually a boring experience. You sit in a comfortable seat, breathe normally, and arrive at your destination. But this comfort is only possible because of a technology that was perfected under extreme pressure during the war, the pressurized cabin. In the 1930s, airlines were starting to fly higher to get above bad weather, but there was a problem. As you go higher, the air gets thinner. There is less oxygen. Above about 10,000 feet, people can suffer from hypoxia, a lack of oxygen that can cause dizziness, confusion, and eventually unconsciousness. The early solution was for pilots and passengers to wear oxygen masks. This was uncomfortable and not practical for commercial flights. The real solution was to create an artificial environment inside the plane. A pressurized cabin is a sealed fuselage that is pumped with compressed air. This keeps the air pressure inside the cabin at a comfortable, safe level, usually equivalent to about 8,000 feet, even when the plane is flying at 40,000 feet. The first commercial plane with a pressurized cabin was the Boeing 307 Stratoliner, which first flew in 1938. Only 10 were built. The technology was new, expensive, and not yet reliable. The war changed everything. Military planes needed to fly higher and higher. Bombers needed to fly above enemy anti-aircraft guns. Fighter planes needed to fly above the bombers to attack them. At these new altitudes above 30,000 feet, pressurization wasn't just about comfort. It was about survival. An unpressurized bomber at that altitude would have a crew that was unconscious in minutes. The B-29 Superfortress was the first bomber to be produced with a fully pressurized cabin as a standard feature. It was a technological marvel, but also a huge engineering challenge. Creating a large sealed cabin that could withstand the constant pressure difference between the inside and the outside was difficult. Every window, door, and seam had to be perfectly sealed. The constant pressurizing and depressurizing put a huge amount of stress on the metal skin of the aircraft, a problem known as metal fatigue. Engineers at companies like Boeing had to solve these problems. They developed new construction techniques, new types of seals, and new alloys. They learned how to build safe and reliable pressurized cabins on a massive scale. The lessons learned from building thousands of B-29s were invaluable. This research was documented in technical reports from the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics NACA, the predecessor to NASA. After the war, this technology was directly transferred to the new generation of commercial airliners. Planes like the Douglas DC-6 and the Lockheed Constellation used the pressurization systems developed for wartime bombers. This allowed them to fly higher, faster, and smoother above the weather. It made air travel safe and comfortable for the average person. Every time you fly today, you are benefiting from the technology that was rapidly developed to keep bomber crews conscious at 30,000 feet. The comfortable, climate-controlled tube you are sitting in is a direct descendant of a wartime necessity. What do we still not fully understand? How many test flights of early pressurized aircraft ended in failure due to structural problems that were never made public? What were the specific unheralded innovations in sealing compounds and rivet patterns that made the B-29's cabin possible? Were there long-term, unknown health effects on the first generation of pilots and crews who spent thousands of hours in these early pressurized environments? Number 10, could a can of meat become a global phenomenon? It has been the subject of jokes. It has been a staple of countless meals. It's Spam. And its journey from a humble canned meat to a worldwide cultural icon is tied directly to the logistics of feeding an army. Spam was introduced by the Hormel Foods Corporation in 1937. It was a mix of cooked pork shoulder and ham, salt, water, sugar, and sodium nitrite to preserve it. Shelf-stable meat product. It sold reasonably well, but the war is what made Spam a household name across the globe. The military needed a protein source for its soldiers that was cheap, easy to ship, and didn't need refrigeration. Where Spam was the perfect answer. It came in a convenient rectangular can. It had a long shelf life. It was a good source of calories and protein. The U.S. government bought over 150 million pounds of Spam to feed its troops during the war. It was sent to every corner of the world where American soldiers were stationed. It became a central part of their diet. They ate it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They ate it fried, baked, and cold right out of the can. Soldiers had a love-hate relationship with it. They joked about it endlessly, but it was food. It was sustenance. It kept them going. But Spam wasn't just for American soldiers. Through the Lend-Lease program, the United States shipped vast quantities of food and supplies to its allies. This included millions of cans of Spam. It was sent to Britain, which was suffering from severe food rationing. It was sent to the Soviet Union. It was sent to islands in the Pacific. In these places, Spam wasn't just a food item. It was a symbol of American abundance. For people who were on the brink of starvation, a can of Spam was a lifesaver. After the war, American GIs left, but Spam stayed. It became integrated into local cuisines in surprising ways. In Hawaii and Guam, Spam became a staple. You can find Spam musubi, a slice of fried Spam on a block of rice wrapped in seaweed, in almost every convenience store. In South Korea, a country devastated by war, Spam became a luxury item. It is a key ingredient in a popular stew called WWII, or army-based stew. In the Philippines, Spam salog, a breakfast of Spam, fried rice, and a fried egg is a national comfort food. The cultural impact of Spam is explored in books like Spam, a biography by Carolyn Wyman. This humble canned meat, created in Minnesota, was spread across the planet by the war. It fed armies, it sustained civilian populations, and it became a surprisingly beloved part of the food culture in dozens of countries. It is a powerful example of how war can change not just borders and governments, but also what people eat for breakfast. What are the remaining mysteries? Are there any surviving records of the original taste testing panels at Hormel in 1937? And what other names were considered besides Spam? How did the specific recipe for Spam change during the war to accommodate rationing and different production facilities? What are the true verifiable stories of how local dishes like budae jjigae were first invented by people mixing army surplus with traditional ingredients? Number 9, can you fight a war with a can of bug spray? One of the biggest threats to soldiers in many parts of the world wasn't the enemy. It was insects, mosquitoes in particular. They carry diseases like malaria and dengue fever. During the war in the Pacific and in other tropical regions, more soldiers were put out of action by malaria than by combat injuries. Finding a better way to kill mosquitoes was a top military priority. The problem was delivery. People had insecticides, but they were usually in liquid or powder form. They were hard to apply over a large area like inside a barracks or an airplane. The U.S. Department of Agriculture had a team of researchers in Beltsville, Maryland, working on this problem. 2 scientists, Lyle Goodhue and William Sullivan, were looking for a way to create a fine mist of insecticide that would hang in the air and kill mosquitoes effectively. They experimented with different propellants. They were trying to find a gas that was liquid under pressure but would turn into a fine spray when released. In 1941, they tried a refrigerant gas called Freon 12. It worked perfectly. They mixed the insecticide with the liquefied Freon in a small, heavy steel container. When they opened the valve, the pressure was released. The Freon instantly vaporized, dispersing the insecticide into the air as a microscopic fog. They had invented the aerosol can. Their invention was called the bug bomb. It was a heavy, reusable steel canister, about a foot tall. It was a critical piece of equipment. Before troops landed on a Pacific island, planes would fly over and spray DDT to kill the mosquitoes. The bug bombs were then used to clear out tents, barracks, and bunkers. According to reports from the U.S. Army Medical Department, this technology dramatically reduced the incidence of insect-borne diseases and saved countless lives. After the war, the technology was declassified. Companies saw the huge commercial potential, but the military bug bomb was too heavy and expensive for home use. A man named Robert Planalp, a young inventor, figured out a way to make a cheap, lightweight valve that could be crimped onto a disposable can made of thin aluminum. This innovation made the aerosol can practical and affordable for the average consumer. In 1947, the first commercial aerosol products hit the market. They were insecticides, but soon companies realized you could put almost anything in an aerosol can. Hairspray was a huge success. Then came spray paint, whipped cream, shaving cream, deodorant, and air fresheners. The aerosol can, invented to fight malaria on the battlefield, became a ubiquitous part of modern life. The widespread use of Freon as a propellant, however, had a serious environmental consequence. In the 1970s, scientists discovered that these chemicals, called chlorofluorocarbons or CFCs, were damaging the Earth's ozone layer. This led to an international treaty, the Montreal Protocol in 1987, which phased out the use of CFCs. The industry had to innovate again, developing new, safer propellants. The can itself, a product of wartime necessity, continues to be a staple on store shelves. What are the lingering questions? What other propellant chemicals did Goodhue and Sullivan test before they settled on Freon? Are there any surviving prototypes of the very first bug bomb? How much did the post-war marketing of aerosol products rely on the public's familiarity with the military's use of insecticides? Number 8. How did a woman's fiber change the course of a war? Nylon is everywhere. It's in our clothes, our carpets, our toothbrushes, and our cars. But before it was a common household material, it was a scientific marvel and a critical strategic asset. Its story begins in the search for an artificial silk. In the 1930s, the DuPont chemical company was pouring millions of dollars into pure research. They had a brilliant chemist named Wallace Carruthers leading a team to explore the world of polymers, which are long chains of molecules. In 1935, his team created a new synthetic fiber. It was strong, yet fine and flexible. It was the world's first true synthetic fiber, created entirely from chemicals. They called it nylon. DuPont introduced nylon to the world at the 1939 New York World's Fair. It was marketed as a miracle fiber, as strong as steel, as fine as a spider's web. Its first major consumer product was women's stockings. When the first nylon stockings went on sale nationwide in May 1940, they were a sensation. Women lined up for blocks to buy them. They sold millions of pairs in just a few days, but this consumer frenzy was short-lived. A few months later, the focus of the world shifted. The United States entered the war. Silk, which was used for parachutes, had come primarily from Japan. That supply was now cut off. The military needed a replacement, and they needed it fast. Nylon was the perfect substitute. It was even stronger and more durable than silk. DuPont immediately shifted its entire production of nylon to the war effort. The slogan became, "Nylon is fighting for our country." No more stockings for civilians. Nylon was now a strategic material. It was used for parachutes, which were, essential for pilots and paratroopers. It was used to make ropes, tents, and tire cords for military vehicles. The strength of nylon cords made tires for heavy bombers and trucks much more durable. It was even used to make the flak jackets that protected soldiers from shrapnel. The story of this rapid industrial shift is a classic example of wartime mobilization, detailed in business histories like Science and Corporate Strategy, DuPont R&D, 1902 to 1980. And women on the home front were encouraged to donate their old nylon stockings to the war effort. These were recycled and used to make more parachutes. The Nylons for Parachutes campaign became a patriotic duty. When the war ended, DuPont switched its production back to consumer goods. The demand for nylon stockings was enormous. When they went on sale again in late 1945, there were nylon riots in some cities as huge crowds of women tried to get a pair. The war had demonstrated the incredible versatility and strength of nylon. This led to its use in thousands of other products after the war. It became a key material in the clothing industry. Like, it was used for everything from carpets to fishing lines to guitar strings. The woman's fiber, which had started a consumer revolution, had been drafted, served its country, and then came home to change the material world forever. What are the big unknowns? What other synthetic polymers did Wallace Carruthers' team create that were deemed failures but might have had other undiscovered uses? How did the military develop the specific weaving techniques to turn nylon fiber into reliable parachute canopies in such a short time? Are there any quantified estimates of how many lives were saved because of the superior strength of nylon parachutes and tire cords compared to their silk and cotton predecessors? Number 7. Could calculating a bomb's trajectory launch the digital age? Every smartphone, every laptop, every digital device we use today has its roots in a massive room-sized machine built for a single urgent purpose to calculate things faster. The first large-scale general-purpose electronic computer was called ENIAC, and it was a product of the war. The problem was artillery. When you fire a large artillery gun, you need to know exactly how to aim it. You have to account for the type of shell, the wind, the temperature, the air density, and even the rotation of the Earth. Calculating the correct trajectory is an incredibly complex math problem. To make it easier for soldiers in the field, the Army's Ballistic Research Laboratory in Maryland produced huge books of firing tables. Each table had thousands of trajectories for a specific gun and shell combination, but creating these tables was a slow, painstaking process. The calculations were done by people, mostly women, who were called computers. Using mechanical desk calculators, it could take one person over a month to calculate a single trajectory. The Army needed thousands of these tables, and they needed them fast. In 1942, a physicist at the University of Pennsylvania named John Mauchly proposed a solution. He suggested building a giant electronic calculator that could do the math thousands of times faster than a human. The Army was desperate, so they funded his project. Mauchly, along with a brilliant young engineer named J. Presper Eckert, led the team to build the machine. The result was ENIAC, which stood for Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer. It was a monster. It was unveiled to the public in 1946, just after the war ended, but it had been working on secret calculations for months. It filled a 30 by 50 foot room. It weighed 30 tons. It contained over 17,000 vacuum tubes, 70,000 resistors, 10,000 capacitors, and 1,500 relays. Its construction required miles of hand-soldered wiring. When it was running, it consumed a huge amount of power, and the vacuum tubes generated so much heat that it needed its own dedicated cooling system. The tubes were also unreliable and burned out frequently. A team of technicians was constantly running around replacing them. But it was fast, incredibly fast. A calculation that took a human computer 20 hours could be done by ENIAC in 30 seconds. It could perform 5,000 additions or 357 multiplications per second. It was 1,000 times faster than any calculating machine that existed before it. The story of its creation is detailed in books like ENIAC: The Triumphs and Tragedies of the World's First Computer by Scott McCartney. Though it was completed too late to contribute significantly to the war effort's firing tables, it was used for complex calculations for new weapon systems. More importantly, ENIAC was a proof of concept. It showed that large-scale electronic computing was possible. After the war, Mauchly and Eckert went on to build UNIVAC, the first commercially successful computer. The scientists and engineers who worked on ENIAC spread out, founding new companies and university computer science departments. The fundamental ideas of electronic calculation, memory, and programming, all brought together under the immense pressure of a wartime need, formed the foundation of the digital revolution. The massive machine built to aim guns paved the way for the pocket-sized computers we all carry today. So what mysteries remain? How many of the women computers who did the original ballistic calculations contributed intellectual ideas to the design and programming of ENIAC, but never received formal credit? Were there other smaller scale electronic computing projects at other universities or companies that were kept secret and whose history has been lost? What were the very first top secret calculations that ENIAC performed before its public unveiling? Number 6, can freezing food for an army change how we eat dinner. The frozen food in your freezer has a direct connection to the battlefields of World War II. The idea of freezing food wasn't new, and Clarence Birdseye had developed flash freezing methods in the 1920s, but frozen food was a niche, luxury product. The technology was expensive, and most people didn't have freezers at home. The war changed all of that. As with so many other things, the problem was logistics. The military needed to ship huge amounts of food overseas. Canned food was heavy and bulky. Dehydrated food often tasted bad and lost a lot of its nutritional value. The military began to experiment with frozen foods. They found that frozen fruits and vegetables retained more of their vitamins and tasted better than their canned or dried counterparts. A study from the period published in the Journal of the American Dietetic Association confirmed the superior nutrient retention of frozen produce. This was important for keeping soldiers healthy. The government became the biggest buyer of frozen foods. They built and leased freezing plants. They invested in refrigerated warehouses and transport. This massive government investment in the frozen food infrastructure jump started the industry. As companies that had been small, regional players suddenly had huge military contracts, they perfected the techniques for freezing all kinds of foods on an industrial scale. They developed better packaging. They learned how to create products like frozen orange juice concentrate. The process for this was patented in 1948 by scientists at the Florida Department of Citrus. But the research was heavily supported by the needs of the military to deliver vitamin C to troops. When the war ended, the industry had a huge production capacity, but its main customer, the government, was gone. They needed to create a civilian market. Luckily, the war had also helped create that market. Many women had worked in factories during the war. They had gotten used to earning their own money and having less time to cook. After the war, many of them continued to work or were looking for ways to save time on household chores. Frozen foods were the perfect solution. They were convenient. A frozen dinner could be heated up in minutes. The quality was much better than it had been before the war, thanks to all the research and development. At the same time, the post-war economic boom meant that more and more families could afford refrigerators with freezer compartments. The first complete frozen ITV dinners were introduced by Swanson in 1953. They were a massive success. The convenience food revolution had begun. The ability to buy frozen vegetables in the middle of winter, to have a quick and easy meal on a busy night, all of this was made possible because of the massive wartime effort to find a better way to feed soldiers. What are the open questions? What were the specific food products that failed miserably in military trials and were never heard from again? How much did the taste and nutritional quality of the first generation of post-war frozen dinners differ from the military-grade versions? Are there any declassified military reports on the psychological impact of food quality on troop morale? Number 5, how did an itchy problem for soldiers lead to an electric shaver? The story of the modern electric shaver is intertwined with the need for soldiers to stay clean-shaven in difficult conditions. While Jacob Schick had invented an early electric razor in the 1920s, it was the war that pushed another company, Remington Rand, to perfect the design and, in the process, create a massive market. During the war, millions of men were in the military. They were required to be clean-shaven. A beard could prevent a gas mask from sealing properly around the face, a potentially fatal problem. But shaving in the field was difficult. Access to hot water and shaving cream was often a luxury. A wet shave with a blade razor was time-consuming and could lead to cuts that could easily get infected in unsanitary conditions. This created a huge demand for a better solution. Remington Rand, which was already a major manufacturer of typewriters and other office equipment, saw an opportunity. They had started making electric shavers before the war. They had a design with multiple cutting heads that was quite effective. During the war, Remington dedicated a significant part of its production to making shavers for the military. These weren't sold in stores. They were sold at military post exchanges, PXs, on bases around the world. For a soldier in a muddy foxhole or on a ship in the middle of the ocean, an electric shaver was a game changer. It offered a quick dry shave with no need for water or cream. This created a captive audience of millions of young men. They got used to the convenience of electric shaving. Remington also used the war as a giant product testing and development program. They received feedback from soldiers in all kinds of extreme environments. This allowed them to improve the durability and performance of their shavers. But the story has another interesting layer. Remington Rand was also a major military contractor producing weapons and other equipment. After the war, they found themselves with a surplus of a very specific product, small, high-speed electric motors that had been designed for use in military hardware. They needed to find a use for them. It turned out these powerful little motors were perfect for electric shavers. They could drive the cutting blades faster and more efficiently than the pre-war motors. This led to a new and improved line of post-war Remington shavers that gave a closer, more comfortable shave. When the soldiers came home, they were already loyal Remington customers. This, combined with the new improved technology, made Remington a dominant force in the electric shaver market. The war had essentially created their customer base and provided them with the technology to build a better product. The convenience of the modern electric shave was, in many ways, perfected on the battlefield. What are the remaining questions? What was the specific military device for which the high-speed motors were originally designed? Are there any surviving military surveys or reports that collected soldier feedback on the performance of different shaver models? How did the widespread adoption of electric shavers in the military influence post-war standards of male grooming in civilian life? Number 4. What if your doctor's pen was designed for a bomber pilot? The ballpoint pen seems so simple, so ordinary, it's hard to imagine a time without it. But for a long time, writing was a messy business. You had fountain pens which used liquid ink that could leak, smear, and took time to dry. The invention of a reliable ballpoint pen was a long and difficult process, and its popularization is tied to the needs of pilots flying at high altitude. The basic idea of a ballpoint pen, a tiny ball bearing in a socket that rolls ink onto paper, had been around since the late 19th century. but no one could get it to work right. The inks were the problem. If the ink was too thin, it would leak out. If it was too thick, it wouldn't flow. The solution came from a Hungarian newspaper editor named Laszlo Biro. He noticed that the ink used to print newspapers dried quickly and didn't smudge. He and his brother Georgi, who was a chemist, worked to develop a new kind of thick oil-based ink. They paired it with a tiny, perfectly machined ball bearing. It worked. They patented their new Biro pen in 1938. When the war started, the Biro brothers, who were Jewish, fled to Argentina. They started a new company there to produce their pens. The pens were a novelty, but they had a crucial advantage over fountain pens. A fountain pen relies on gravity and capillary action to draw ink down to the nib. At high altitudes in an airplane, the lower air pressure can cause a fountain pen to leak all over the place. Biro's pen didn't have this problem. It worked through friction. The rolling ball picked up the thick ink from the cartridge and deposited it on the paper. It could write at any angle, and it wouldn't leak at high altitude. The British Royal Air Force saw the potential. They needed a pen that their bomber crews could use to write in their logbooks and navigation charts while flying at 20,000 feet. They licensed the design from Biro and had a British company start producing them for the RAF. These Iro pens, as they became known in Britain, were a vital piece of flight equipment. They were reliable tools for a job where a leaky pen could be a dangerous distraction. After the war, the technology crossed the Atlantic. An American salesman named Milton Reynolds saw a Biro pen in Argentina. He realized its huge commercial potential. He rushed back to the United States, made a few small changes to the design to get around the patent, and started producing his own version, the Reynolds Rocket. He launched it at Gimbel's department store in New York in October 1945. The marketing was brilliant. He claimed it was the pen that could write underwater. Thousands of people lined up to buy the new miracle pen. He sold 10,000 pens on the first day at $12.50 each, a huge sum at the time. The first Reynolds pens were not very reliable, but the technology quickly improved. Other companies like Parker and Bic entered the market. The price dropped dramatically. The ballpoint pen, a technology refined for the needs of high-altitude bomber crews, had conquered the world. What do we not know for sure? What was the exact chemical formula of the original ink developed by the Biro brothers? Are there any surviving flight logs from RAF pilots that were written with the first military-issue ballpoint pens? How did the early competition between Reynolds, Parker, and other companies shape the final design of the modern disposable pen? Number 3, could a two-way radio in a backpack change how we communicate? The ability for people to talk to each other over long distances without wires is something we take for granted today. We have cell phones, but the ancestor of the cell phone was a bulky, heavy device that was one of the most important communication tools of the war, the walkie-talkie. The idea of a portable two-way radio was not new, but creating one that was small enough for a single person to carry and powerful enough to be useful was a major challenge. The first device to be nicknamed a walkie-talkie was the Motorola SCR 300. It was developed in 1940 by a team of engineers at the Galvin Manufacturing Corporation, which later became Motorola. The SCR 300 was a frequency-modulated FM radio transceiver. It was a backpack-sized unit that weighed between 32 and 38 pounds. It had a range of about 3 to 5 miles. It was a huge leap forward in battlefield communication. For the first time, small infantry units could stay in constant contact with their commanders. This allowed for much better coordination of attacks and defenses. Over 50,000 of these backpack radios were built and used during the war. This wasn't the device most people think of as a walkie-talkie. The more iconic handheld device was the Motorola SCR 536, also known as the Handy Talkie. This was a true engineering marvel for its time. It was developed in 1941. It was an AM radio about the size of a loaf of bread and weighed about 5 pounds. It had a pull-out antenna and a range of about a mile over land. The Handy Talkie was a personal radio. It was used by squad leaders and on landing craft. It was rugged, simple to use, and revolutionary. Its development required the miniaturization of radio components like vacuum tubes and batteries. The need for thousands of these devices pushed the electronics industry to make smaller, more reliable parts. The impact of these portable radios on the war was immense, as detailed in many military histories. They changed the way battles were fought. After the war, the technology and the concept of personal, two-way communication entered the civilian world. Motorola and other companies began making two-way radios for police departments, fire departments, and businesses. The technology continued to shrink. The invention of the transistor in 1947, a direct result of wartime research into solid-state electronics, was the key to making radios even smaller and more portable. This led to the development of citizens' band CB radios, pagers, and eventually the first mobile phones. The first handheld mobile phone call was made in 1973 by a Motorola engineer, Martin Cooper. That first phone was still a bulky brick-like device, but its lineage could be traced directly back to the handy-talkie. The desire to give a single soldier a voice on the battlefield ultimately led to the smartphone in your pocket. What are the open questions? Who were the individual uncredited engineers at Galvin who solved the key miniaturization problems for the handy-talkie? Are there any recordings of the first battlefield communications made using these devices? How did the widespread availability of instant communication change the psychology and decision-making processes of small unit commanders? Number 2, how did a radio signal bouncing off a plane lead to GPS? Today we can pinpoint our location on Earth with incredible accuracy using the Global Positioning System, or GPS. This system of satellites and receivers is a part of our daily lives. It guides our cars, tracks our packages, and is built into our phones. This incredible technology grew out of a much simpler system developed to help ships and planes navigate in the dark and bad weather LORAN. LORAN stands for Long Range Navigation. It was developed in secret at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology's Radiation Laboratory during the war. The RAD Lab was the center of American radar development, but they also worked on other radio-based technologies. The problem was navigation. For centuries, sailors had used the stars to find their position. But what if it was cloudy? Or what if you were in a fast-moving airplane? The military needed a reliable all-weather navigation system. LORAN was the answer. It was a hyperbolic navigation system. It worked using a series of paired radio transmitting stations on the ground. A master station would send out a pulse. A slave station a few hundred miles away would receive the pulse and then, after a precise delay, send out its own pulse. A receiver on a ship or plane would pick up both pulses. By measuring the tiny time difference between the arrival of the two signals, the receiver could determine its position. It wouldn't give you a single point, but a line on a chart. By taking a reading from a second pair of LORAN stations, you could get a second line. Where the two lines crossed, that was your position. The first LORAN system became operational in 1942. It was a huge advantage for long-range bombers and naval convoys, especially in the vast featureless Pacific Ocean. It allowed them to navigate accurately without needing to see the sun or stars. It was a complex system requiring specialized charts and trained operators, but it worked. After the war, the LORAN system was made available for civilian use. It was adopted by commercial airlines and shipping companies. The system was upgraded over the years, becoming more automated and accurate. LORAN-C, a more advanced version, was used for decades as the primary radio navigation system for North America. The fundamental concept of LORAN, using the timing of radio signals from known locations to determine a receiver's position in known, is the exact same principle behind GPS. The main difference is that GPS uses satellites in orbit instead of ground stations. This provides global coverage and much greater accuracy. The development of GPS in the 1970s was a military project driven by the need for even more precise navigation for missiles and submarines. But the scientists and engineers who built GPS stood on the shoulders of the people at the RAD Lab who first figured out how to use radio waves to draw lines on a map. LORAN was the crucial first step. It was the intellectual and technological ancestor of the blue dot that tells you exactly where you are. What do we not know? Who was the specific individual at the RAD Lab who first proposed the hyperbolic system for navigation? How many ships or planes were saved from being lost at sea because of this new technology? Are there any declassified documents that detail the early struggles and failures in getting the timing of the master and slave stations to work correctly? Number one, what if a synthetic rubber shortage fueled the rise of a global superpower? This isn't an object you can hold in your hand, but it is a material that underpins the modern world. Synthetic rubber, its creation on an industrial scale during the war, was one of the most incredible scientific and engineering achievements of the 20th century. And it had profound consequences. Before the war, the United States got over 90% of its natural rubber from plantations in Southeast Asia. Rubber was essential. It was needed for the tires on every car, truck, and airplane. It was needed for hoses, gaskets, and boots. Your modern life and a modern military ran on rubber. In 1942, Japan conquered the rubber-producing regions of Southeast Asia. The U.S. supply was cut off. This created a crisis. The country had a stockpile of natural rubber, but it would only last for about a year. Without rubber, the American war machine would grind to a halt. The U.S. government launched a massive crash program to create a synthetic rubber industry from scratch. It was a project on the scale of the Manhattan Project. The government brought together a consortium of 4 major chemical and tire companies: Standard Oil, DuPont, Goodyear, and Firestone. They were fierce competitors, but they were forced to share their patents and work together. The main type of synthetic rubber they focused on was called government rubber styrene, or GRS. It was made from 2 chemicals, butadiene and styrene, which were derived from petroleum. The science was known, but no one had ever tried to produce it on such a massive scale. The government invested over $700 million, a colossal sum at the time, to build 51 new synthetic rubber plants across the country. The project was a breathtaking feat of engineering and management. New factories were built in record time. Chemical processes that had only been done in a laboratory were scaled up to produce thousands of tons. By 1944, just 2 years after the program started, the U.S. was producing over 800,000 tons of synthetic rubber a year. This was more than double the amount of natural rubber the country had imported before the war. The rubber crisis had been averted. The story of this incredible effort is chronicled in books like The American Synthetic Rubber Research Program by Peter J.T. Morris. The impact of this program was enormous. It didn't just win the war. It fundamentally reshaped the American economy. It created a huge new petrochemical industry. The knowledge gained in chemical engineering and large-scale project management had applications far beyond rubber. After the war, the U.S. was no longer dependent on foreign sources for this critical material. The synthetic rubber industry continued to grow, developing new and better types of rubber for thousands of applications. This industrial and scientific power, forged in the heat of a wartime crisis, was a key factor in America's post-war economic dominance. The tires on your car are a direct result of this massive, desperate, and ultimately successful gamble. What are the great unknowns? What were the environmental impacts of these hastily built chemical plants, and have they ever been fully studied? How many accidents and failures occurred during the frantic scale-up process that were kept secret for morale and security reasons? What would the modern world look like if the synthetic rubber program had failed?